Hello, everyone. This is Debra Richardson, and today I am putting the AP in Happy, where accounts payable teams are empowered to protect the vendor master file from fraud. This podcast will give a voice to accounts payable team members by talking about the growing reality of cyber attacks in their world and which vendor setup and vendor management techniques they can apply to protect the vendor master file from fraud. Need training? Visit the Vendor Process Training Center to enroll in your choice of weekly live and on-demand training sessions. Plus, get access to vendor setup form templates and reference tools that will help you and your team avoid fraud, fines, and bad vendor data. So sign up for a free account to get access to free training sessions, vendor process FAQs, and a resource library with information you need to manage your vendor master file. Visit training.debrarrichardson.com today. The link will be in the show notes. Check fraud is increasing. They take longer to settle, and they cost more in equipment, supplies, and manpower. All great reasons to convert your check payment vendors to ACH payment. But don't use that as a way to clean your vendor master file. That task really needs to be done first. So here are 5 do's and 1 big don't that you need to think about before you get started. Keep listening. Welcome to episode 348, Converting Vendors from Check to ACH Payment, 5 do's and 1 big don't before you start. Now, first of all, I will say that these do's that I've included, it all sounds like processes that you do when you are cleaning your vendor master file. And that's because it is. And so I'm going to put a link in the show notes to an on-demand webinar. It's a recording, and it is on 8 steps to clean your vendor master file. And it's free. You do have to register in order to watch it, but that will give you a great, not only 8-step process, but I also have tools. I demoed some tools that you can use to clean your vendor master file as well. They're not AI tools, but they are some tools and validation resources as well. So I will put a link to that in the show notes. So make sure you check that out if you are interested. All right. So you're converting your vendors from check to ACH payment. That's always great. And while we know that checks do have some fraud prevention, and I won't say built in, but you can set it up with your bank where you have positive pay, and not just positive pay. You really need payee positive pay, where when a check that you wrote or your company wrote is presented to the bank, they will check not only the check number and the check amount, but they'll also check the payee that you listed in your file. And if it doesn't match, then they won't pay it. And I say that because a lot of times positive pay, depending on the institution, will not automatically include that payee positive pay. And so fraudsters are taking advantage of that, and they're stealing the checks, not changing the amounts, just changing the payee. But in any event, I know it does have some fraud prevention built in if you have, set up with your bank for positive pay. And I know that there were a couple of, at least one, victim of business email compromise where they made a change to a banking details for a vendor. And of course, it was a fraudster. And so what they did is switched all to checks. And hopefully they have positive pay in place. But what they have found and what I found when I was a practitioner issuing checks, and what you probably found as well, is that even if there is additional fraud prevention that you can put on checks, um, they still cost a lot, right? They have equipment that you have to purchase and maintain. They have check supplies, the ink, the checks themselves, and you got to have somebody that will run those checks, print them, and then get them out the door. And funny, and I have said this before, so if you've heard it before, it's still funny. Anyway, when I was a practitioner and we had this huge check machine, actually, we had two check printers, but one of them was the main one and it would jam. And so went down there one day and my supervisor and check folks were there. And I said, "Why do you have a picture of Bob Marley on the printer?" Like they had taped up a picture there. And they said, "'Cause it be jamming," and it did jam. So there were print jams. Not only that, we had issues where, and I think I said it before too, the checks were put in upside down. So it's just all kinds of issues with checks. And if you want to switch to check to ACH payment from checks for your check payment vendors, totally understand that. But there are some things to do that you probably need to think about and do, I should say, before you start that conversion program. So let's get into that. So again, I have 5 do's and one big don't. And I'm going to start with the do's first. So the first thing that you want to do before you start sending out the requests or communication to your vendors to switch from check payment to ACH payment is you want to inactivate your vendors. So you want to make sure that you are only converting those vendors that your company is still doing business with. And when you look at vendors that are inactive, that means you're looking at vendors that have not done business with your company within the last 15, 18, 24 months. I've seen some companies stretch that out to 36 months. And that's a whole separate podcast in itself. And I do go over it in the webinar of 8 steps to clean your vendor master file. But just know that the less, and it makes sense, the less time period of inactivity you have. So let's say 15 months versus 36 months, the less active vendors you're going to have, which means the less vendors that you have to worry about fraud, because at that point they'll be inactive. And you do want to inactivate vendors regularly, because after that inactivity period, then you can't be sure that their street address is still valid, that their tax ID is still valid, that their name is still valid. That could have changed. And so you want to inactivate those vendors. And if your company wants to do business with them in the future, that's fine. You just have to collect all the same information that you would collect from a new vendor, because you want to revalidate all that information. And as long as their tax ID hasn't changed, you could just reactivate the initial or the original vendor record. But for inactive vendors, there is no reason to send out a request for banking when you're not going to pay them or do business with them, or they're going to be inactivated based on, no activity with your company. And getting to the types of activity that you need to look at to determine whether vendors are inactive, I recommend 4. The first one is you want to look at PO activity, and especially open POs, because you can't close vendors that have open POs anyway. But I do challenge you to check and verify that they're just not, blanket open POs that I know some companies that I was with would just create those just so they don't have to keep creating POs, right? So they have one blanket purchase order that never expired. You don't want to keep a vendor open because they have one of those on it. So make sure you're doing research. But PO, if it's open PO, you can't inactivate them anyway, but you do want to look at the PO activity because if they just had a recent PO that closed, that your company is still doing business with them if it's within that inactivity period of months that you have determined works for your company. So that's PO activity. And then the next one is invoice activity, right? If you got a pending invoice, that means your company is doing business with them. Payment activity, that's a good one because one of the reasons that you want to inactivate vendors is if their information is no longer valid. And if you have paid that vendor, it at least means that their and it was successful, that their payment information or remittance information was valid. And if they are check payment vendors, that means their address is valid. So you want to make sure you're looking at payment activity as well. And then the fourth area you might not think of looking at, but it is the last time the vendor record was updated, because a lot of times some of these vendors, and especially PO vendors, if they're working with your purchase order team or procurement team, right? So they haven't been used for a while, but now all of a sudden, your company needs whatever this vendor has, and they know that their information has changed. And so they have been proactive. Yes, vendors can be proactive, and they've sent that information in to update their vendor record. And so again, the inactivity piece is for a big part of that, right, is making sure that the information is no longer stale and they've already updated it. So I challenge you to also look at the vendor record modification date, unless in your system, vendor record modification date can be based on something else. And so take a look at that for your system and see if that is a fourth area that you would like to consider for inactive vendors, determining inactive vendors. All right, the second thing, this is the one that is probably most not like or included in cleaning your vendor master file, but just make sure you have a vendor bank account form, your own form. Don't only collect uh, their banking information on vendor letterhead or banking letterhead or even a voided check, because all of those things can be forged. Now, yes, you can still collect them, but collect them with your own bank account form. And on that bank account form, you want to make sure you're asking for authenticating data so you can be sure that you're getting that completed form back from the vendor. Now, in most cases, one of the things you'll use that vendor bank account form for to prevent fraud is if you have a change in banking, you're going to ask for the existing banking. And so that field or that section should be on your bank account form as well. But when you're converting from a check payment vendor, then you want to make sure that you have something else on the form that can be used as authenticating data to prevent fraud, so that when you get the form in, you can look it up in your system. So I do recommend that you have the remittance address on the form. I also recommend that you have the internal team member that the vendor has a relationship with on the form as well. And really, the initial benefit to those things is, one, you have your own form. Two, you have some authenticating data on the form, so they can't just give you, write some forged documents. It's really going to be an obstacle and a deterrence for fraudsters, right? They most likely will just abandon your process or that request and go on to the next potential victim that's not asking for all of that data. So I would make sure that you are creating a vendor bank account form. And if you already have one, that you make sure you update it so that you're also collecting authenticating data to make sure that you're getting that from your actual vendor. All right, so that was the second thing. The third thing is make sure you're standardizing your vendor mailing addresses. So if you've sent checks to them and the checks haven't been returned, okay. But today there are some bulk upload options to check all your addresses at once. That's one of the things that's in that I demonstrate within that on demand webinar recording. There is a separate recording where I demonstrate or demo some tools. That's one of them. It was from, I think when I did the demo, I don't know if they had changed their names. They used to be changed their name by that time or not, but the third party provider that does those bulk upload validations that I did a demo with is used to be called Smarty Streets, but now they're called Smarty. So smarty.com. Anyway, if you've sent checks to some of your check payment vendors that haven't been returned, that's fine. But, right, if you're doing a bulk upload, just grab everyone, including those and the ones that you haven't paid for a while. Not even though, but maybe you haven't paid them. But it hasn't been so long as to be within that window to be considered inactive. So you do need to make sure that you are standardizing those mailing addresses to make sure that when you send something out, that it will be received and not be returned. And hopefully you have a process when you're onboarding vendors and changing addresses on your vendors that you are formatting them so that they can be mailed. But just in case anybody got in there or a vendor got in there and it wasn't done, this is a great way to get those addresses standardized for mailing so that they'll be formatted for successful delivery. All right, so the next one, number 4, is to validate email addresses and find missing email addresses. And this one kind of goes along with the third one, the one before, right? Standardizing mailing addresses, because this is how you will, right, contact your vendors in order to ask them to, right, participate and convert from check to ACH payment. So you're either going to contact them by email address or by mailing address. And I guess you could put phone number in here as well. What I want to talk about is the email addresses and the tools that are available to make sure that they are valid. So there are some tools out there like Zero Bounce that will let you know if those email addresses are still valid. And that could be really critical now because lots of people have switched jobs. When I talked about it before, it was like right in the middle of the pandemic. And, many people were switching jobs, leaving jobs. And so a lot of those email addresses that you have on file may not be valid. Now, I know when I do vendor master file cleanups, I definitely include uh, the email validation again because they may not be valid. And so Zero Bounce is one that'll, let you upload bulk email addresses and then we'll let you know if they're valid. But I am sure there are other tools out there. Whatever you choose, especially if you're, watching that on-demand recording of the webinar, the one recording where I talk about the tools, make sure you get approval for all of those. Because, if anything happens, Debra said is not a valid defense. So make sure that you're checking with your IT department, your leadership to make sure any tools that you use that I may recommend uh, are valid to be used for your company. So you want to validate your email addresses because you do now want to send a request to convert, right, to an email address that is invalid because it's just going to bounce right back. So, speaking of email addresses, I bundled validate email addresses with finding missing email addresses. And you know how hard that can be. And if you find valid email addresses for those vendors that need to be converted to ACH payment, then that is an easier way to reach out to them. And it's also much faster. But if you don't have them, there needs to be a way that you can find them. And so I do have an episode, a podcast episode. It's episode 146, and it's called Nine Ways to Collect Missing Vendor Email Addresses to Update the Vendor Master File. And that is updated for 2021, because I think I had one back in episode 51. I don't remember what year that was, maybe 2019. But episode 146 has 9 ways to collect missing vendor email addresses. Now, one thing I do want to say that has not aged well, there was one of the 9 ways that the fraudsters have just taken over now, and that is searching on the web for a vendor website so that you can get any communication information for that matter. That includes addresses. So if you do not have an email address, or if you do not have an address, there have been new scam alerts out there. Even the Federal Trade Commission posted a new scam alert to say that fraudsters have now taken over the top results that you may get from like a Google search, right? They actually have bigger budgets for SEO. They take out ads, and they may have just created a spoof site for your vendor so that when you go on what you think is the vendor's website, because, right, it came up first, so it must be right. When you go on that vendor's website, you're just going to get the fraudster's information. And so you want to make sure that you've got some other options to find legitimate, real email addresses, and for that matter, maybe even mailing addresses as well for your vendors. And so you want to take a look at the 8 of the 9 options that I show. And I have been there as well. We weren't doing a converting vendors from check to ACH payment campaign or anything, but I do know that in our system that I inherited, right, we had a lot of missing email addresses. And most of you should be collecting, or actually all of you should be collecting email addresses when you set up vendors now. That should be required. But that wasn't always what we were doing. And so I inherited a database that did not, a vendor master file that did not have um, uh, all email addresses. We were missing a lot. And so that happened to be one of the things that I had an intern do during the summer. And so those are the things that I put in the episode 146, 9 ways to collect missing vendor email addresses. So make sure you check that out. All right. So the fifth do is do a bulk 10 match. And this way you'll see which vendors you also need to collect a W-9 or W-8 from, right? Vendors will always tell you if they have had a change, especially if they are receiving their payments fine. If they don't, if whatever change it is, like a change to their tax ID, for example, if they're still receiving their payments just fine, they may not even tell you, or may not think you need to know that their tax ID changed, but you absolutely do. So as long as you're reaching out to them, look at everything else that may need to be updated at the same time. And so it's a great time to do a bulk 10 match. And this way, when you're reaching out to them, you can get an updated W-9 or an updated W-8. All right. So these are the 5 do's, and that was inactivate vendors, create your vendor bank account form and ask for authenticating data, standardize mailing addresses, validate email addresses, and find missing email addresses, do a bulk 10 match, was the last one. And those, except for number 2, which is creating that vendor bank account form, all of those are part of what you do as you are cleaning your vendor master file. So again, make sure you check out that on-demand recording for 8 steps to clean your vendor master file so that you can be ready when you start that campaign to convert vendors from check to ACH payment. All right. So the last thing is the one big don't that I do not recommend that you do. And I saw this all the time when the pandemic first started and everyone shifted to home, and it was hard to get those checks out, get them signed. It was hard to get them printed, right? Because you had to have them micro ink, so you had to take the printer home, or somebody had to go into the office. And so I saw where when you sent AP, either the generic email box, or maybe you emailed someone in AP. If they didn't have a generic email box, it was in their signature, or again, it was in an email, not an email, but a notification that popped up when you sent an email to that generic email address or to a specific person. You can turn on, is it the rules or something, where when an email is received, the requester or the sender of that email will automatically receive a notification of something. And this notification, or these notifications always said, hey, we are converting from check to ACH payments. Here's where you send your information. And the problem with that is that it is a huge invitation to fraudsters, because they know that a mass update is going on, and what better time to try to get fraudulent bank details updated on your vendor records. And so bad time to do that. Fraudsters may be in your email, and even if they're not in your email, they could be collaborating with internal fraudsters. And if the internal fraudsters see this as an opportunity, they can relay it to the external fraudsters, and that is another right recipe for fraud. And that is really fresh in my mind, because last week's episode 347, was about just that. Access gone wrong 4 times when employees exploited their access and colluded with fraudsters. So you don't want to invite fraudulent activity, by advertising via a notification on email to everyone, right? Not just the folks that are the vendors that are getting paid by check today, right? You're notifying everyone. It's just an open invitation that can lead to fraud. So just like you do not want to include inactive vendors in the campaign to convert, check payment vendors to ACH payment vendors, you don't want to include everyone else either. So make sure you're directing the communication to only those vendors that qualify. Now, one other thing I forgot to say is I actually do have a vendor banking form that has authenticating data on it. It's already included. It's got some other fraud prevention built into it. And so I'm going to put a link so you can check it out if you're interested. It is a paid item, but it is an immediate digital download. And all you have to do when you receive it is customize it, throw your logo on it, put your contact information on it, review all of the fields that are required, determine if that's going to be the same. So customize it, make it yours, and then send that to those current check payment vendors. Could save you a lot of time. So check the link in the show notes. All right. So thanks, everyone. I hope you enjoyed episode 348 of the Putting the AP in Happy podcast, where accounts payable teams are empowered to protect the vendor master file from fraud. Don't forget to check the show notes for the links mentioned in the podcast. And if you enjoyed this episode, consider subscribing and writing a review of my podcast on the platform that you use to listen. Stay happy.